Hey everybody, it's Bust with 5 decks to try for the Heart of the Huntress balance patch. And so, the Siren Song has been nerfed. It's up to 6 mana from its old place of 4. I still think it's going to be playable, but we'll save that for another day. The likes of Kaisa and Powder Pandemonium have been nerfed, and then a wide range of buffs across the board, from Jax to the Frostbite package and many other of these subtyped units. And so if you're not familiar with the patch notes, you can head over to the Play Runeterra site. The full patch notes are available over there. You can take a peek at what's happening if you're not entirely familiar with what's happening in the decks we're talking about, or you can check out the dev stream over on Twitch on the main Legends of Runeterra Twitch page. Ruben Zoo and Riot Vriss were talking about the changes and how they came about. And so, with that in mind, we got 5 decks for you to try out. The first and foremost, the big one that came to mind to me was the Faithful Watchdog. As soon as I saw the Watchdog, it immediately reminded me of the Vayne Jarvan deck that we played in the previous Eternal Runeterra Open. We took that to a top 8 finish, and it was based on the deck that Infinity Patrons used to hit rank 1 on the ladder in Standard a little bit before that event. And so, it's a deck that's really built around the Forge mechanic, and so it has a lot of the Forge units like the Weaponsmith's Apprentice and the Favored Artisan. You're going to use that to grow up an equipment, maybe a Darkened Spear, maybe something from an Improvise, and then you're looking to take advantage of both Cataclysm and Fishfight to control the board, and then the Night Ranger Defector is your big kind of build-around unit, and so you can get a extra strong equipment onto your Defector, get those Scout attacks in, so if it's a Darkened Spear, you get those bonuses in your deck multiple times, then you can use the Cataclysm play on your opponent's attack token to get those extra Scout attacks in, or you can use the Cataclysm on your Darkened Spear, if it's in a Naka form, to get those extra attacks in with the additional unit summon. And so there's a lot of sweet synergies all tied into the Forge mechanic, and the Faithful Watchdog fits in there quite nicely all on its own. And so it used to just be a 2/3. Now it's a 1/2 that forges the equipment as it gets attached to it, and it's very easy to just kind of envision these lines to where you say, play the Weaponsmith's Apprentice on 1, don't play anything on turn 2, then you go into turn 3, play the Watchdog for full price, right? Get a free equip on a Darkened Spear, then you have this double forge onto your Darkened Spear, giving the Watchdog +2/+4, so you now have this 3/5 monstrous dog out here, capable of doing a lot of very powerful combats. And so if you even want to look beyond that, and the space is to where if your Weaponsmith's Apprentice, well, if your apprentice dies, it doesn't feel good. But if one of your other units just dies and you get to play the dog on the cheap, you have lots of ways to really get those extra stats onto your equipment, and then that equipment is still, of course, good for the remainder of the game. The big value of the equipment being as the unit dies, you still get to maintain the stats, just costs a little bit more mana to get those stats back on the board. And so this is kind of like the first place I'd like to dive into as soon as the patch comes out. If you're interested in seeing the Vayne Jarvan deck in action, you can scroll backwards through our channel just a little bit. It's been about a month since we've played this deck, but there's probably 5 or 6 videos where we take this one into action. After that, in a similar vein, Jack, very big upgrade set now that he gets to heal himself a little bit whenever you refill the mana, and I really just love this idea of using Jack with Cataclysm. And so what we've kind of featured on the screen is a deck that was kind of close to pushing into the tier 1 space. It was much closer to tier 2 than tier 1.5, but it had a lot of power using the Jack along with the strikes that you would get out of Demacia. So if you want to use, say, fish fights or cataclysms or single combats, you have ways to force Jack into combat. And then as you have the strike abilities on Jacks, you have the strike abilities on Barnacles to put the coins into your hand. It gives you a bit of discount on all of these spells that you're trying to cast. And so I'm very interested in seeing kind of how quickly we can get this Jack into combat. If you want to just imagine a very simple scenario where you attack with Jacks, he wins the combat, right? Because he's just bigger than the unit, takes a bit of damage, you play the coins, you heal maybe a point, you get a Cataclysm in, kill off another unit, and now you're able to potentially heal a bit more on future turns as you generate some more of those coins. And so just a very powerful collection of things that you can do with Jax in terms, I keep calling him Jax because he's the one that we play much more frequently. You can play Jax and Jax in the same deck, right? You just have your access to the fish fight that way. But no, the strikes with Jack are all incredibly powerful. The Barnacles plays fantastically with the likes of Night Ranger Defector. It's very easy to forget that the Barnacles gives out Brash, and so you can also get a lot of evade evasive attacks in with the Night Ranger Defector. Just a lot of really interesting, sweet combos that come between these Jack strikes, along with the equipments out of Freylord and the equipment package and the cataclysms and all the nice little cycle of synergies that you can put forth once you get these units into combat. I will say with Jack, before I move on to the next deck, I had to go and look through the standard cards to see if Soraka was still in the format. As much as I hated Soraka Tahm Kench in the days of old, it just annihilated all of the decks that we really enjoyed playing. But her having that kind of heal trigger attached to Jack, just healing himself along normally throughout the course of the game, it struck me as kind of a very interesting combo. You say, just get out of here, Tahm Kench. I'm going to double heal Jack in one turn and turbo level this Soraka and start drawing a bunch of cards. It's going to be pretty sweet, but you have to save that one for Eternal. It's not happening out here in the lands of Standard. Up next, we have Samira Sejuani, and the real focus with this deck would be the Glacial Saurian. I really find myself heavily interested in playing the Saurian. It's just a fantastically strong unit. Now that it's been granted Overwhelm, it just plays in fantastically in any curve. It's just such a high-powered value unit, distributing the stats into your deck, very easily drawing you a card if you're having the likes of Omen Hawks or another subtyped unit in your deck like one of the Weapon Masters, and then just being a really meaty 5/4 with Overwhelms, quite a good deal. And so the first thing that I immediately thought of with the Saurian is just kind of the classic Overwhelms deck out of Freylord, whether or not that's going to be like a Darius Sejuani Bone Club style deck, or if you're going to come into the Samira Sejuani space, they're all, you know, very potentially relevant decks. But I really like this idea of having effective unit boosting units like the Omen Hawk and the Glacial Saurian, along with having this nice Overwhelm package with the Ruthless Raiders and the Tusk Speakers and the Sejuani and the Saurians, and just so many units that are exceptionally strong, just getting like +1/+1. Like, one of the very interesting things out of the previous meta was most of the damage-based removal only dealt a single point, right? It was very popular to be playing the Bandle City Gen deck with all of the group shots and all of the pie tosses in it. And so just giving your units a single point of health can take them so much further in terms of just a little bit of survivability against the Bandle City decks, or at least making them invest an additional 1 or 2 mana and taking down a unit that they would have easily taken down before. And so I think it's very easy to kind of forget how much these little bonuses add up. And I think that there's a lot of real potential in one of the Overwhelm decks now that the Saurian has the ability, whether or not that's Samira Sejuani, as we've kind of featured here, or the kind of Darius Bone Club decks that also made their way in. We'll just have to go and consult with Rico Rex. If you're not familiar with Rico Rex, he plays on EU and hits rank 1 all the time with a bunch of Overwhelm-based decks. He probably saw this patch notes and just got more excited than any patch notes in the history of the game and said, that Saurian is mine. Here he comes straight up to rank 1 with this guy. I can't wait to see what he puts together with this. Up next, this one is kind of interesting to me. I really like the idea of Frozen in Fear and Rhymefang Denmother. The upgrade to the Rhymefang pack is incredibly powerful. I know it's not on the screen, but the Rhymefang pack is now a 0/4 Overwhelm that gets +1 attack for every Frostbite that you've played. And so in the past, the pack, it kind of counted your Frostbites as soon as you played it. And so you played it, it got +1/+1 for every Frostbite that you did. And so if you played Frozen in Fear as your first Frostbite, then you only got a 2/2. Or if it was later in the game, you would get like a 4/4 or a 5/5, whatever. But now you can get that unit on board early and just let it kind of hang out, right? I mean, what if we have this kind of spaces to where on turn 4, turn 5 or so, we play a Frozen in Fear, shrink down our opponent's really strong play, kill it off with Quietus, and now we just have this like 1/4 blocker hanging out, right? And so that 1/4 is going to shut down all kinds of emerging combats, and then as the game progresses, and if it makes its way up to a 3/4 or a 4/4, we have a very powerful attacker without putting in a whole lot of work, right? And so the seeing these cards kind of reminded me back, it's been, I don't know, 4 or 5 Mastering Runeterra open events ago. I think it was back in the Aatrox era, before things like World Ender caught the nerf, and I'm pretty certain that Drissoth won one of those with Ashe Kindred, but putting a lot of the same kind of ideas into place as to where you have these Frostbites very good at shutting down single target aggro decks, right? So if your opponent's trying to attack you down with a whatever we just featured in all of these initial ones, right? That the Night Ranger Defector with a big equipment on it, right? If that's what is a big thing in the meta, you frostbite that unit, it's really shut down a lot of its capabilities. But then you can also tie those frostbites into using things like Quietus and Whole Soul Harvest, so you can kill off any unit in the game. But then if you're also getting a little bit of additional value out of these cards like Frozen in Fear and Rhinefang Denmother, you have a lot of potential power there. And so the thing that's really kind of struck me as interesting with this style of deck, whether or not it comes together to be an Ashe Viego deck or something else, but something still using the Frostbites along with the Quietus package, is that I think the Frozen in Fear is actually just better than the Den Mother now, right? They kind of want to belong in different decks. If you're looking towards playing something like Ashe LeBlanc, where you're much more aggressively using your Frostbites and getting into early combats, you're typically much more happy to have a unit like Rhinefang Den Mother, as it puts more stats on the board. They're much more aggro heavy at that stage of the game. But as I think towards a deck like this, to where we're not so much attacking early with Ashe, we're not trying to get sweet Ashe challenges with the Trifarian Glory Seekers and the like, but we're playing a much more mid-rangey value game. That's a pretty good deal to frostbite an opposing unit, kill it with Soul Harvest, and then have a 1/4 that just hangs out and grows as the game continues on. That's a very powerful defensive package that I think a deck in this kind of vein would be very interested in playing. And so we'll probably never play this deck, right? We're not playing Shadow Isles or removal spells anytime soon, but I think the idea is something interesting to think about in the upcoming days. So last but not least, in our decks to try section, this one is just super interesting to me. I don't think Twitter has really figured out what's happening with this, but IchiranRamen has been playing this deck. I don't think he's managed to hit rank 1 on the ladder with it just yet, but he's always a front page ladder grinder. I don't remember the exact story that IchiranRamen did, but I think they were like in Worlds and playing in the group stage and then just disappeared, right? I think they played like 2 rounds and started out 2-0 and then just disappeared. Like, no social media presence. They didn't appear any further. They're still alive, they're still out here on the ladder and stuff, but it was just like, I was playing in Worlds before work. I wasn't expecting too much out of myself. I started off 2-0 and had to go to work, and it's like, I guess we're done. But I'm interested to see what comes out of this. This is a deck that I haven't played it. I've lost to it a bunch. I think I'm currently like 0-3 or 0-4 against IchiranRamen as he's been piloting this thing. But is a deck that's geared towards 2 things, right? It has the full 3 copies of Avenging of Vastaya, has the 2 copies of Rite of Negation, so it has 5 ways to deal with a turn 3 Siren Song. And so that's not really in the meta, so to speak, anymore. But these are kind of combos that also work against, say, like the Karma Seth decks, or it also works mainly more so against the Jin Bandle City deck, to where you can now come in, have your opponent play Riptide Rex, you condense your opponent's Riptide Rex, and then Rite of Negation away all of their damage abilities. And so it has a lot of these interesting kind of control elements to it. It has this great board stall with the Portals package. It has a good interactivity package between all of the counter spells, even has a little bit of removal in the pie tosses and the drop the bombs. But at the end of the day, you still have this big game tight Coon coming down as a big boy, summoning up an additional ambush unit, and then having him just convert Nidalee into Gnar into giant overwhelmers. And so I like a lot of the thoughts and ideas that are happening with this deck. It has a very nice interactive control package to it, but then it has that big overwhelm finish coming out of the Tycoon and the Gnar Nidalee. And so I'm kind of curious to see if this one can get on the radar now that the format has changed just a little bit. Again, this is one that the Twitterverse was a bit bamboozled by. I ran into it on the ladder a few times and just never really saw what was in it. But he's been having quite a bit of success with this thing, and it's most certainly off the radar. But those were the 5 decks we were bringing forth to potentially try. We'll certainly get some of these into play over the course of the next couple of days. The last thing I kind of wanted to call out are the big decks from the current meta that either got buffs or at best didn't have any nerfs coming onto them. And so there were the Sump Monument Teemo decks that I hated so much in the previous format. Nothing happened to Sump Monument, and none of the core cards in this deck got nerfed. And so the availability of this is still here. Up to the top right, we have the Gen and the Condense indicating the Jin Bandle City style deck. That's the one that we just kind of previously mentioned before, to where you're playing some kind of board stall package, and then you're trying to build up to Lord Broadmane and Riptide Rex. You can copy those champions with the Condense, and then that's going to value package up as you look to close out the game with your big spells duplicated. Down to the bottom left, there's the Returno Wrench style decks, most commonly with Jinx. I was a big fan of the Kennen Jinx deck, and none of the cards within it have received any nerfs, and so there's a lot of potential for Returno Wrench Jinx as just to kind of being the premier aggro deck of the format. If you're looking to really climb up on day one of the ladder as everyone's out there trying to brew with the new cards, and you want to just abuse them with some kind of aggro deck, the Returno Wrench Jinx deck might be your best bet. If that's not it, you can probably still stick with Annie Jin, but I've never been a big fan of Annie Jin, and so I point you towards the decks like Kennen Jinx. Last but not least, there's Jax Ornn, another set of champions that didn't receive any nerfs in this patch, and so they were pushing their way up to the top of the meta in the previous set. There was a little bit of meta evolution in the sense that people were trying to play Aatrox Vayne, and they're trying to play Scouts as a way to pick on the various Fizz decks, and then Jax Ornn just annihilates all of those. And so if we do enter this space to where the Demacia based go wide style decks become a thing, Jax Ornn has a lot of game, and again, it didn't receive any nerfs, and so it's been a top 3, top 5 deck for the past 4, 5, 6 months, and so with nothing changing there, this is another real potential for a big deck in the upcoming days. And so that's it. 5 decks to try, 4 more to keep on your radar. I hope you find at least one of them interesting. And so if you have a spicy brew you'd like to see us play one of these decks, you had a great deck building idea you'd like to see us feature on the channel, be sure to let us know. We'd like to come up and play it if we get a shot. And so that is going to do it for us today. I hope everyone learned a thing or two along the way. Maybe you had a good time watching. Thank you very much. This is Bust.